Right, hi, I'm back again. This is episode 4, the final exciting installment. You're on the final run now, and we are going to deal with putting the binding on. So I accept this is a little time after because it will have taken you a little time to do your quilting, but you are on the home straight whenever it comes to doing the binding. In your kit, you have the fabric for the binding. You will have cut that into 3 strips. You now need to join the 3 strips together. We have included sufficient fabric for you to do this as a double binding. So to do a double binding, you are, well, obviously you're going to fold it in 2, aren't you? So you're going to start with a strip that is this wide and you're going to fold it in 2. Because you're doing that, it makes a lot of sense to actually join pieces together across the diagonal so that when you do this, you're not getting the bulk of this seam in the one place, creating a bump in the binding. So to do this, what you do is this basically. Okay, so you are going to put your fabrics at right angles. If you are confident, you don't need to draw a line across. Since you're, maybe this is the first time you're doing a double binding, it makes good sense to just draw a line between here and here. So I have offset the 2 strips so that you do have little points to aim for from there to there. Now, nowadays I don't need to draw that line. Pop it in, it's not going to do any harm. Because you are just sewing 2 pieces of fabric together, then you want to be down using a 2 or a 2.5 stitch length again. I like this seam to be really quite tight, so I do this on a size 2 length of stitch. So size 2 along here. I have used my flower headed pins just to hold things in place, and now when I do that, you will see that I have a nice diagonal line. I have to create my seam allowance here. So I just need a pair of scissors, which I can just take from here. And I'm going to cut away the excess. This is also one of the occasions when I'm going to press a seam open. This doesn't happen very often because I like my seams to be pressed to one side. I think it takes the stress out of the stitches. So I'm just going to finger press that to start with, and then with my iron I'm going to run across this. And I know I'm on the wrong side, but so I'm going to turn it over and just do it on the right side also. It's important that you do this folding really accurately. So whenever it comes to pressing, you want to be making sure your raw edges are even all the way along. Now, you don't bind quilts very often. Obviously, the bigger the quilt, the longer it takes to make, and binding, you maybe only bind a quilt once every 6 months, once a year on some of the larger projects. So it's always worthwhile having a reference point for how you do this. So, you know, keep an eye on this video going forward. Raw edges together. I also find that you can, on bigger quilts, end up with a very, very long piece of binding. I do this, I do all of this folding in 2, and then I pop it into a little plastic bag and drop it down at my feet, and let it come out of that bag as I need it for going round the quilt. Now, so that is the piece of binding that you need to be going all the way around your table center or table runner. There are 3 pieces of fabric, so you have to make 2 joins. I'm going to set that aside because I obviously haven't had time to quilt the piece that I was working on earlier today. So we are going to go back to my 3rd or 4th Blue Peter table runner here. So I'm going to show you how I stitch my bindings on, both on the machine and how I finish them off. So again, I'm using my 1/4 inch seam. I'm now going through at least 5 layers of fabric. Well, 4 layers of fabric and 1 layer of wadding. So you need to be increasing your stitch length. I would go up to, I think, a 3. I'm just going to gather up my pin cushion here. There we go. Clear the decks so that I can show you how I'm going to do this. So we're going to line ourselves up. We have our 1/4 inch, our stitch length a little bit longer, and 1 foot pedal. Okay, so we're coming up to a corner. How do I get round this corner? So what we're going to do is we are going to sew up to about 1/4 inch or two stitches away from the corner. So just take your time, maybe 1 more stitch, that should do me. And we're going to stop, cut the thread. We're going to then turn this corner by mitering it. So we're going firstly away from ourselves, then back down, because the fabric has to be pointing in the direction you're going to sew. So I have, let me just show you what shape this is. Look, you have this pinch, okay, which creates enough fabric to be able to turn to the back. So I'm starting from the very end because the little gap has been allowed by stopping 2 stitches before the corner on the run into the corner. Just going to come on down here. Do make sure that you're not catching anything between yourself and the table. I'm just going to come a little bit further down here. And a little bit further. I want to allow myself about 12 inches, 30 centimetres of a gap. Just makes it a little bit easier whenever it comes to this final join. Because again, to reduce the bulk, you want to be joining on the diagonal. So I'm all stitched up, and what I'm going to do is to show you how. I've just popped a couple of pins in. Let me take those out so that it is clearer. So you want to be nice and flat. Let me create a flat surface as opposed to a raised one with the sewing mat. So with that in the way, you want this to be as flat as always. Just think flat for this whole process. So we're going to set the ends inside each other. Okay. Like that. Going to give this one a little tug in this direction. And we're going to put a couple of pins in. We're going to put a pin in on that, the top layer. And then we're also putting a pin in the bottom layer. So we have pins in place in both the ends. Okay, so we are going to make this final join on the diagonal. So again, we are reducing the bulk. So we have slotted the two pieces inside each other. I popped a pin in the top layer of this end and a pin in the top, directly on top of the one below in the second end. We're then going to just take these apart. We're going to do a half turn, okay? Half turn, so that these two pins are going to create a little cross. We're then going to pop a couple of pins across the diagonal. Before you cut anything, before you do anything, just make sure that everything is heading in the right direction, okay? So at this point, I would suggest you want to draw a line from here across to here. To save time, I'm going to just sew across here. Now, I have reduced the stitch size down to a 2 again, so that I have a nice tight join, nice tight seam. So just make sure your fabrics are flat. Now we have too many pins in the way, so let's just move them out of the way and head towards the join between the two fabrics there. There we go. So again, we have to create our seam allowance, so we're cutting these pieces apart. Well, not apart, actually, we're going to allow ourselves a seam allowance. So we're going to cut a little bit that way, and then we're going to cut across here. We're going to press the seam open. And as before, we're going to make sure that our raw edges are even one with the other. And you're now ready to finish popping your binding on. So you had reduced your stitch length down to 2 to make that join, because you're only going through 2 layers of fabric. Now you are going to be going through the entire sandwich again. So I've increased my stitch length back up to a 3. Might even make it a little bit bigger. You'll notice I haven't put any pins in any of this binding. I always find it much easier to tension it just as I go. The pins just get in the way and don't really serve a useful purpose. There we go. Let's cut that off. So we now have our binding attached all the way around. It can be really useful to just ease the binding to the back by just running the iron very gently along like that. Just do this this piece. Okay, I see I've got a few threads here, but they will just pull away. So just remove those as you go. And the final part of this project is stitching the binding down on the back. Now this you do by hand using a slip hemming stitch. So I'm just going to go round the corner here because this is the only different bit about this. So we're going to go into the backing fabric, come back up into the fold of the binding. That's why you've put a double binding on. It makes it easier to do this final stitching. So vertically down from where the thread has come through the fold into the back, slide along a little bit in the backing, slide along a little bit in the fold. I am using a matching thread here, and I'm just getting up to the corner. So we have our mitre on the front, so we want to create the same effect on the back. So going to go up and then turn back. So I'm going to do a couple of little stitches up this mitre to hold it in place. Turn and come back down in the fold of the binding. You're now really on the final hurdle here. You just have to finish your hand stitching. Treat yourself to a box of chocolates, a glass of wine. Congratulate yourself on a job well done. Thank you so much for letting me start you on your patchwork journey, or addiction as some people will talk about. Please send in any of your finished projects. I know one lady actually sewed along with me this morning and sent in a picture already. I'd really love to see the completed projects. Do stay safe, and I look forward to joining you again soon. Bye.